Hello, readers and writers. I am Professor Grandpa Tonio, the book guy and the writing guy, and today I have the pleasure of introducing you to an author whose books send me off on exciting adventures with likable young characters who show a great deal of courage and determination as they face some really difficult challenges. The author who is with me today is Liesl Shurtliff. Welcome, Liesl.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, I'm delighted to talk with you today about your life as a writer. Thank you for taking the time to meet with me.
Absolutely.
Liesl Shurtliff is a best-selling author who has received many awards for her series of books. In the delightful Fairly True Tales series, she takes fairy tales of old and reimagines and expands them by building a wonderfully detailed world with lots of humor and powerful themes of belonging, survival, and doing the right thing. The titles in the Fairly True Tales series speak for themselves. There's Grump, the fairly true tale of Rumpelstiltskin. 12-year-old Grump discovers he has a gift for spinning straw into gold, and that's when he gets into a mess of trouble. Jack, the fairly true tale of Jack and the Beanstalk. Jack and his sister Annabella are on a mission. The king of the giants has taken something that belongs to them, and they'll do anything, even dive into a smelly tureen of green bean soup, to get it back. A fun story with lots of fast-paced, daring action. And then there's Red, the fairly true tale of Red Riding Hood. Red is not afraid of the big bad wolf. In fact, she's not afraid of anything except magic. But when Red's granny falls ill, it seems only magic can save her, and fearless Red is forced to confront her one weakness. You are gonna love Red just as much as I have. And there's Grump, the fairly true tale of Snow White and the Seven Dwarves. A grumpy dwarf who gets tangled up in Snow White's feud with the wicked queen named Queen Elfrida, Veronica, Ingrid, Lenore. That's otherwise known as evil. Oh my, who's gonna win this battle? Liesl Shurtliff is also the author of the Castaways trilogy, which tells of 3 city kids who get on the wrong train and wind up on a wild, magical mystery adventure through time with time-traveling pirates, a ship with an unforgettable personality. That's right, you heard me, it's a live ship of all things. And add cliffhanger predicaments that make you keep turning the pages real fast. The first book in the Castaways trilogy is Castaways, the Mona Lisa Key. Intriguing title, I think. And look for book 2, Castaways, the Obsidian Compass, which will be published in October this year. Liesl Shurtliff spins words with gold. That's what one of her fans said. Another said, she makes magical worlds feel utterly real. I think that's so true. I mean, I feel like you expect you'll soon step right into the world she creates, enjoying a thrilling and often hazardous adventure. Liesl Shurtliff was born and raised in Salt Lake City, Utah, the 5th of 8 kids. And this is what she has written. My 7 siblings tortured me, but I really like them now. I can figure that. She now lives in Chicago with her husband and 4 children, where she writes full time. You can find her online at www.lieslshurtliff.com. That's LIESLSHURTLIFF, Liesl Shurtliff. And here we are. And I begin by asking you, Liesl, what age did you realize your fascination with books?
Well, I kind of struggled learning how to read, um, but I remember very distinctly around third grade picking up the Boxcar Children. I think I found it in my basement. One of my many siblings had probably read it before me. And it was the first book that I remember getting lost in the words and the story, and just not wanting to put it down. And so that I remember was sort of my first experience with just loving books and loving stories, and really stories have always been something that I've loved, whether I was reading or not. I love a good story. I loved being read to. I love the theater. So to me, it's all about story. And that's something that's been with me, I feel like, my whole life, even before I learned how to read.
Well, that
So,
makes so much sense. And
yeah.
you talked a little bit about just now about theater. Well, I know that in college you studied music, dance, theater. Why did you leave that career behind and take up writing?
Um, it was sort of a natural decision after I had my own kids. um, After I had my daughter, I realized it was really hard to maintain a performing career. Um, it was really hard to practice during nap time, because it would wake her up. Belting show tunes just didn't quite work out. And so I realized I needed a little bit more of a quieter passion. And I turned to writing more thinking it would be sort of the hobby that I would keep me creatively engaged until I could more fully pursue my theater passions. But somewhere along the lines, I just completely fell in love with writing and realized that as I had been studying theater and doing these shows, what I loved about it was the story arcs and the character development, and that was the part that really fascinated me. And so as I was writing, a lot of the things that I had studied in theater translated very well to writing. And so I don't think it was really like this, it felt like a very natural transition to writing stories. And so that's really how it happened. Is my kids. My daughter likes to say that she was the inspiration behind me becoming a writer, and it's true.
It's true, I guess. And I see that, in theater you were creating stories all over the place. And so I understand what you mean by that transition. Not such a difficult one. Of
No,
all
and
the,
I think a lot of writers have. I find a lot of writers have backgrounds in theater. It's not uncommon, actually.
hmm, that's interesting, isn't it? Yeah. I mean, my career started in theater. I was a performing artist for my MFA degree. And then,
See?
yeah, I know. And I mean, it was fascinating. I mean, I loved performing, and I think that in a way, I think it's happening when I'm writing too, because I'm just, I speak to these characters in their voices and stuff like that. So, I mean, I think that comes back to me,
Yeah, it really does translate very nicely, I think, in many ways.
yeah, I'm learning that more and more. Of all the readers you could have chosen to write for, why did you decide to write for middle grade kids?
Yeah, that also felt like it sort of was very natural and happenstance, sort of like becoming a writer in the first place. It sort of fell into my lap in a way. At first, I thought I would write picture books because I thought that was going to be easier. Let it be known that writing picture books is not easy. It's actually quite deceptively difficult, I think. Um, and then I thought I wanted to write young adult novels, and I still would like to write both of those things, but I think my own voice very naturally gravitates towards middle grade, um, towards that 11, 12-year-old voice. And I think it's because those were such formative years for me, and sort of where I live in my head in a way. I sort of view the world as that in lots of ways. I sort of view the world as that 11 and 12-year-old child. I just sort of, my brain just sort of goes there. So it's where I naturally rest as a writer, I feel. And I just think it's the golden age of reading. That's when kids, right around when I found the Boxcar Children in third grade, I think right around third, fourth grade, these kids are starting to see the magic of books. And I get so many letters from kids saying that they didn't really like reading until they found whatever book of mine. And it just drew them in. And that is such a gift to me, because that's what I wanted as a kid. That's what the Boxcar Children was to me, was that book that showed me how wonderful reading could be. So I wanted to be a part of that magical place where a child is developing their reading identity at that age. And it's a really magical experience. And so I think that's why, all those things.
Well, that's so wonderful, and I'm so happy that teachers and parents will someday be listening to this interview and pick up on that, because it is that period of time where kids come alive, with books, when the books come alive. I remember somebody saying to me, all it takes is one good book. That's all that has to happen, is that one good book has to land in that child's lap, and there you go. Because then they realize that they can do it again and again.
Right. You've cracked the door open. I think then the trick after that is continuing to find the right books to keep them going. Now they believe that there is a good book for them, but with my kids, some of my kids, they can go through, 5 to 10 books before they land on one that they're going to stick with.
That's true. So true. So you have to have a lot, I think, out there. Do you
Yeah.
read stories to your own children as you're working on them, or once they're published?
I'll read them to them once they're published. Now they're at an age where they kind of want to read them on their own. So, I mean, they're in sort of that golden, I have my youngest is only 2, but then I have a 10, 12, and a 15-year-old. And so they like me to read to them.
Oh.
But I don't really like reading my own books to them. It feels, I'm too self-conscious and self-critical. So while I was reading to them, I couldn't do it. I couldn't enjoy it the way that I do when I'm reading other stories. So my husband actually will read my books aloud to them, and that's really sweet. Or now, like I said, they're kind of at an age where they want to read them on their own.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. I know you're making me smile, because I know when you talk about, I get so self-conscious when I have to, I have to perform the reading, let's say, in front of a group. I much prefer when I go into a middle school, for example, I'll just bring, a slide, a presentation of the manuscript as it was developing. That makes me feel okay, because they can see that it was messy and awful and despairing, and then you just keep going, but to read it, I don't know, I'm going to be invited back to that school, and I'll have to see if they want me to read portions of Lucas and the Game of Chance. We'll have to see how that goes.
Yeah, it can be really intimidating. You want to pick the right moment to share with them. It seems logical that you would choose the beginning, but I don't know that that's always the best place to share just a little snippet,
Yeah.
Sometimes it is.
I understand. I was just thinking about that myself, because I think what I would probably do is just hone in on one of those, something where there was something magical going on.
Yes.
Something like that. Yeah. What sparked your interest in fairy tales and reimagining them into full-length, very complex stories?
Oh, I've always loved fairy tales. For as long as I can remember, I don't know if obsessed is the right word, maybe just a hair shy of obsessed with fairy. My grandmother gave me a copy of Grimm's fairy tales when I was quite young, And I don't think she knew what she was giving me. I think she thought they were going to be sweet little fairy stories like Disney. But I don't think she understood that the Grimm's fairy tales are quite gruesome and dark. So I'm reading these stories and, heads are being chopped off and fingers are being chopped off and there's dead bodies everywhere. And I'm just like, my grandmother was very prim and proper. So it was it did not align. But I loved it. I loved it. I loved the darkness and the mystery. It felt like it was sort of mirroring how I felt in lots of ways, like sort of out of control of my own destiny, and these grown-ups and people around me sort of telling me what to do or making decisions that really affected me, but I really had no say in the matter. And so these fairy tales really resonated with me on so many levels, and anything having to do with fairy tales, the fairy tale ballets, Shelley Duvall's fairy tale theater, I watched over and over again. I was kind of obsessed with it. When I started writing really seriously, and you can see it in my young writing for sure. Everything is fantasy fairy tale, has some sort of fairy tale connection. But when I started writing seriously, with the intent to be published, I shied away from it. I was thinking, no, I want to be like a serious writer. I'm going to write like contemporary fiction. I loved those stories. I thought that I needed to do something different. And so I did a lot of more contemporary kind of realistic fiction. And then I remember getting the idea for Rump. I was working on a story and something about names came up, and I thought, oh, it would be interesting if there was a world where names were your destiny. And my mind instantly snapped to Rumpelstiltskin. And that was one of my favorite fairy tales as a child. And then this idea just blossomed in my head. And I think eventually our psyches have a way of bringing us back to the place where we belong. And for me, that really was fairy tales, fantasy, magic. That's when I really felt my writing really take off and blossom, and I found my voice. I resisted it for a long time. I'm not sure why. I mean, I know why, but it's silly how much we resist things that could really benefit us, and that was one of them. I resisted the fairy tales. I thought I needed to be serious and deep, and found that I found actually the depth of my writing in these fairy tales, and expanding them and exploring them and making them my own.
Oh, that's so wonderful to hear. I think that what a good thing for kids to hear too, as as blossoming writers, to know that they can follow that instinct and let that happen. I mean, that's really a good way to go, because it's very satisfying when you discover that voice. And it takes a while, I think, for anybody to really come to that.
It does. I think I often tell young writers, like, play around, experiment with things. You never really know where you're going to kind of hit on something and find your voice. At the same time, we have that advice to write what you know, and I usually say, well, write what you love. Write what is speaking to you right now, or things that you're thinking about and that interest you. If you're writing what you think other people want to hear or read, it's going to fall flat, and people will see through that.
That's so true. Thank you. I find myself, I'm in a writing group, and sometimes what happens is I feel like I'm writing for them, and I get so strung out by that, because I don't want to do that. That's not my purpose. My purpose is to write what I believe in,
Yeah, yeah.
And And it's a little bit of a challenge there, but I'm getting better at it because these people are wonderful, and they've been very supportive. So it's
Yeah.
it's something that you have to learn how to do. You're known to be passionate about writing books kids will love, but also about helping them grow confident in their reading identity and writing skills. So, if I may ask, how do you make that happen in schools when you're working with kids?
Well, when I go to schools and I'm talking about, I share a lot about my own reading journey and how I did not consider myself a reader as a child. Like I said, I struggled to learn how to read. And even when I found books like The Boxcar Children that I really loved and read multiple times, I did not see myself as a reader because I didn't personally enjoy the books that I was made to read at school. I didn't usually gravitate towards the books that my teacher was recommending and wanting us to read. Um, and so I usually, one, when I'm speaking just to teachers, to educators, I really caution them from making it seem like one book is better than another. That one book is worth reading more than another. It's fine to have like books that you love and sharing those books with students, but recognizing that sometimes the books that you love are really not going to be the books that the students love. You're approaching them with two very different experiences. For the kids, um, I I usually talk about how it's okay if you don't like a book. No book is for everyone, but for everyone there is a book. That's sort of my motto when it comes to reading choice. I am very, very passionate about free reading choice, that kids have as much opportunity to choose the books they're reading as much as possible, that they have options, that they have access. I think classroom libraries are a really big deal. And I I tell them, you give a book a chance, you try to read however many pages, but if it's just not speaking to you, there's lots of other books, and maybe try another book um, that will speak to you. Um, so those are kinds of the things that I do in terms of trying to help them find their reading identity. I really believe that every child is a reader, that there are books out there that are just for them, that they will love and enjoy. But it might take some time for them to develop their tastes and their identity as a reader.
Well, I think right. And I think the word that keeps popping up there that's really important to me is the choice, that they have to be surrounded by people who know what's out there.
Yeah, I mean, and they need to be given ownership, and also not only choice, but validation of
Mm.
choice. So I I really cringe when I see teachers sort of put down a choice that a child, a book that a child is reading, and I'm just kind of like, what do you think that's going to do to them, how they're going to feel about this book that they're reading, that they're enjoying, and you're saying that it's not good enough, that it's not real reading. I just think that's really counterproductive. So always, when kids pick a book and they're enjoying it, is you just validate. You just, that's so great. I want to hear more. Maybe I should try it, and make them feel like what they've chosen to read is valid and interesting, and therefore they are valid and interesting.
Oh, that's nice. And I think that's, what comes to my mind right now is the phenomenon of the graphic novel and
I
how,
was I was thinking exactly about that.
yeah,
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 absolutely.
I mean, the comic, they were considered to be comics. I loved comics. It was one of the first type of, that I got into reading. And I thought it was so interesting and so adventurous. And for a long time, they were just shoved back, away from everybody. And now people are just grabbing at them. I think it's wonderful. I
They're
love.
exploding, but still seeing a lot of resistance from educators about this, and I'm actually in the midst of writing a piece about it,
Oh, good.
called In Defense of the Graphic Novel, because I've had several teachers complain that the kids are reading so many graphic novels, and one even went so far as to say she thought it was lowering her students' vocabulary level. And and there's some really good research going on out there, showing how beneficial graphic novels can be. And I'm thinking in particular about my own children,
Mm-hmm.
who one of them was, I guess what we would call a reluctant reader. I don't think he would see himself that way, but graphic novels have been kind of his lifeline. And really, there was a point where he was only reading graphic novels, but I'm convinced that if he hadn't been reading the graphic novels, he wouldn't have been reading at all. And the graphic novels built his confidence to a point where he felt like he could tackle the longer novels. So, and aside from that, I really don't understand the point of view that somehow that they're less, I think maybe it's because we have novel attached to it, that somehow we're trying to compare it to a full-length novel with no pictures, but they're not comparable. They're two completely different things, just as a picture book is different from a novel, and the radio is different from television. It's
Yeah, I know. I think that one of the things that's coming to mind right now when you're talking to me is the fact that the graphic novels. I mean, well, first of all, I wish we could start calling it graphic literature or graphic books or something, because the there, some of them are biographies or memoirs, and they're not necessarily novels. And I don't know how we've got that word. I think we're overusing it too much, and so it really restricts a lot of people's thinking. And the other thing I think is that some of the people that I've come across who don't look, they go, like they're downplaying it. What I think, they just don't know what's out there.
Well, yeah, like, don't knock it until you've tried it. I mean, have you read some of these graphic novels? Some of them are brilliant. I mean, some of them brilliant enough to win major national awards, National Book Awards, Newberries. I'm thinking of like Nimona and El Defo, and these books that Roller Girl, that are just, they're deep, they're dynamic, they have strong, important messages. They have, complex plots. They have really interesting themes, and the pictures tell one story while the words tell another. It's engaging different parts of your brain. I mean, I could go on about this for hours, but I won't. I'll just write an article about it.
Yeah, write it and let me know, because I think that I'll spread the news. I mean,
okay, I will. I'll let you know.
I surround myself with a lot of teachers, and they're usually very liberal and very progressive, and so they're not the kind that would reject a kid reading, a graphic novel, or a graphic anything. But there are people I've come across lately, who are out there in education, who definitely don't agree with us. I want to turn to Time Castaways, which I find so fascinating. When I read Time Castaways, the Mona Lisa Key, it seemed to me that a lot of research went into developing that story. There's time travel, time warping, a sentient ship of old aspects of art history. I mean, how much research did you do, actually?
So much research, hours and hours, weeks upon weeks. I actually, I did quite a bit of research on time travel itself. Not that I was trying to make it particularly scientifically accurate, because it certainly isn't. But I did want some sort of essence that I had at least learned a little bit about time travel theories. So, reading some things about Einstein, and I actually attended a lecture by a mathematician who spoke very authoritatively on time travel and really seemed to know what he was talking about, and basically talking about time travel as like this real thing, like this real possibility. It was scientifically possible. And he said, he mentioned that one of the, I always forget the title of that movie, but there's some film where there's a time travel aspect, and he said it was the most scientifically accurate film. It's starring Matthew McConaughey, and now do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I can't remember the title too, but I know exactly what
Interstellar.
Oh, right. Okay, there we go.
Interstellar. Yeah, so he said that was actually the most scientifically accurate portrayal of time travel that he had seen. So a little, but I didn't spend a lot of time there. I actually spent a lot of time researching the Mona Lisa theft of 1911, where Vincenzo Peruggia stole the Mona Lisa right out of the Louvre, just plucked it off the wall, took it out of its frame, and carried it out. And it was missing for 2 years before it was finally recovered. That was a fascinating one. I hadn't heard of that theft until I started writing this book. And I did quite a bit of research of the Padmanabhaswamy temple in Kerala, India, where there are actual vaults beneath the temple filled with billions of dollars worth of treasure. So it kind of had this Indiana Jones kind of feel to it, but it's real. It was true. And then, of course, a lot of research about Queen Elizabeth, who's always been one of my favorite historical figures. So lots of research, and it was just so fun to research and just come upon little snippets where I just saw an opening for me to use in my book. Usually when there was a mystery or blank space, very similar to how I would approach my fairy tales. Anytime I saw a hole in the story, a question unanswered, I found I see it as an opportunity for me to use it and expand and put my own characters in that moment.
Well, that's the magic of it, isn't it? I mean, when you think about it, you have, you develop that authority in a sense, and I just love knowing that I can. It's almost like my little stage. You know what I mean? That I can put people on and let them relate and move them around. And that's fascinating. Well, that was a lot of research. And once again, I'm so happy that people will hear this because. I don't know if some people think that authors it just magically happens, but I know that practically every author I talk to, including myself, you engage in research to make, for me on the island that the story that is coming out took place. I mean, I put it in the Aegean Sea, and I had to do a lot of research on the flora and the fauna, to figure out what was really going on this island. If I wanted to develop some kind of an awareness of the vegetation and the animals and stuff like that.
Completely. So yes, I had to do a little bit of that similar kind of research for book 2, The Obsidian Compass. There's without giving away too much in the story, they do travel to the Siberian Ice Age, and they're on Wrangel Island, which is the island where the last known woolly mammoths lived about 5,000 years ago, and they're building fires in this cave, right? And my copy editor very astutely caught that. She's like, is there wood on this island? It seemed fairly barren. There's not a lot of trees because it's the Ice Age, right? And then I realized, oh yeah, they can't be burning wood. That would be impossible.
Yeah.
So they're burning dried woolly mammoth poop.
Yeah.
Because it is full of grass. The woolly mammoths are eating the tundra.
Yeah.
and so their poop would be full of grass that when once dried could be burned. However, it would still burn quite effectively. So that was actually a delightful moment. It was, and it's so fun to have problems pointed out to you and to find creative ways to solve them. And sometimes the research really comes in handy there.
That's absolutely right. That's wonderful. What a great story. Well, speaking of the book 2, what should your readers anticipate about Matt, Ruby, and Corey's continuing adventures? Not that you want to give away the entire plot, but can you give us some clue?
Sure. So they will time travel again. We will get much more about their parents' backstory. So at the end of book 1, we learn a little bit more about their parents' connection to time travel. I don't want to give away too much there, but they do have a connection. And so we get much more of their story, which propels a lot of things. And they'll travel to. So they're still racing against Captain Vincent. And they'll travel to the Chicago World's Fair, the World's Columbian Exposition of 1893 in Chicago. They'll meet sharpshooter Annie Oakley. They'll travel to Yellowstone National Park, which is a favorite childhood place of mine. I grew up not too far from there, and so when I was discussing, possible settings for the books 2 and 3, my editor was like, "Well, where would you want to go? Where do you want them to go?" And definitely Yellowstone was a place that is near and dear to my heart, and I find so fantastical itself. It's a very magical setting. If you've ever been to Yellowstone National Park and you look around, it feels like another world, like you're almost like you're on Mars or something, especially when you get on the geyser basin with Old Faithful and a lot of the geyser pools there. It's really, really neat. So those are a couple of the adventures. There's more to figure out about the compass itself. Obviously, this is called the Obsidian Compass. And so there's a lot about the compass and how it was made and who made it, and how the Hudsons are involved and connect with that. So lots of mystery, lots of adventure. I think it really pulls you along and kind of keeps you guessing until the very last minute.
Wow, that sounds great. I can't wait to see it. And then did you I mentioned in the early part of the interview that it'll be available in October. Is that still true?
That is still true. October 15th.
Oh, good. Okay. Wonderful
Right.
to hear that. We'll have to celebrate.
Yes.
In Grump, the fairly true tale of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, 4-dwarf Rilga, I hope I'm not destroying that name.
That sounds good.
I love the name. Introduces Borland, aka Grump, to a very special mirror, and and says, "The mirror can show you yourself. You can't see yourself with your own eyes, can you? And yet we all need to reflect on ourselves from time to time because life is one big mirror. That which we put into the world will always come back to us." I would love you. I mean, I'm going to ask you to do something, a suggestion that I think young readers would want to say to you. Oh, can you explain that final sentence about the giving out and the taking in? I think it's fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, I really think this is all about becoming self-aware. It's really easy to look at other people and what they're doing and think that we know what's going on and sort of judge the situation, but we can have real blind spots when it comes to ourselves and our own actions and who we are, who we're becoming, what we're doing. So I guess the mirror in Grump really is this symbol for reflecting on our own selves, on our own choices, and what we're putting out into the world, and how that not only affects other people but affects us. I do really believe that what goes around comes around. What we put out there is what we're going to receive in return. Um, and that can be really hard to grapple with, and to come to terms with. Not to say that if bad things happen to you, it's your fault that you brought that upon yourself. That's not what I'm saying. But I think in terms of, we have to think in terms of like our relationships with people and how we're treating other people. I guess a good example of what I'm trying to say is, I remember a teacher talking about how she was reading Wonder to her students. And of course, Wonder is this beautiful book all about empathy and, befriending people who are different from us and dealing with difficult things. And so they were having these wonderful, beautiful discussions about kindness and, choosing kind, of course, is the big theme of the book. And she thought it had gone so well. And then she witnessed at recess time a couple of girls excluding another girl and teasing her and being really mean. And she was just so saddened that somehow it hadn't really sunk into their brains
Yeah.
about what it meant to really be kind, that they didn't realize that they were being so unkind. And that's kind of what I mean about, trying to really reflect on what we're doing. Is it kind? Is it benefiting just us, or is it benefiting other people? It can be really difficult to look at, to reflect and think, is the way that I'm acting, the way that I'm living, helping or hurting?
Precious, very precious indeed. But the concept of civility has been on my mind a lot lately. And I'm glad you mentioned Wonder. That's a fascinating book, and I want to post something about it. There's a site that I go to, which is Elwyn. Her name is elwynautumn.com, and she's an advocate, an anti-bullying advocate.
Uh-huh.
And she was a classroom teacher for about 20 years, and then she's also writing. But her website is her Facebook group page is all about bullying, and I just treasure it so much, because she's really out there saying, come on kids, wake up, and what you just said, what goes around comes around, or however you say that, it's like, what are we doing to one another here? And I'm so glad you talked about that. You said in Time Castaways, the Mona Lisa Key, you wrote, writing any book is always a big undertaking, like climbing a mountain. So I'd like to ask, what is it about writing that makes you feel that way?
Oh, I sometimes just getting the words out on the page, especially in that first draft, feels like a monumental task. It doesn't always flow for me. I don't know any other way to say it. I hear about authors who talk about, they had a dream and they wrote this book in 3 weeks, and I just want to punch them in the face. Talk about not choosing kind. It does make me feel a little bit violent, because I have never had that. Everything I write feels like it takes an incredible amount of effort. I feel like the ideas come really easily, or I get this feeling that I know, sort of what I want to write, but getting the ideas from my head to translate to words on the page it feels like trying to translate some kind of ancient dead language on tablets that have been corroded for thousands of years.
pretty powerful image, my dear. I think, yes.
You get it? You got it now?
Yeah, no, I got it. Oh, no, I mean, because my friends will also say to me, look, would you please stop complaining and just realize that every writer writes differently?
Every
You
writer writes differently.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and so you're not, so, all right, so why put yourself down that you don't do 10 books a year, or whatever you want to say about that. I mean, I just think we all, and I just think we have to keep reminding ourselves, and I think that's what's so great, about talking to you, because we're endorsing each other, saying that that's okay. It's okay to be,
It's
to be a
okay.
slow writer, or it's okay to struggle through it rather than making it always seem like it's an easy task, and
Absolutely.
yeah,
I
no,
100% agree with that.
yeah, and I agree with you there too. I think that I'm a slow writer, and it does take me a lot of thinking to to get to that place where where there's a little bit of movement, you know what I mean? And I feel like it's kind of moving along, but it does take some time to get there.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, what kids often ask me, I'm going to ask you. They often say, well, "What is the easiest and what is the most difficult thing about writing for you?"
Well, I would say the easiest thing is just getting the ideas themselves. Ideas, to me, ideas are free. They're everywhere. They're there for the taking. Everyone has them. Often we have the same ideas. Clearly, I'm not the first person to take a fairy tale and turn it into my own story. So the ideas themselves um, feel like the easiest part, and yeah, those are just magical.
Mhm.
Definitely the hardest part for me is writing the first draft, just getting those words out. It feels like creating something from nothing.
Mhm.
So it's very, very difficult, that part, just writing those words. Once I have the words down, the revision part would be the next piece, besides getting the ideas themselves, that feels really um, enjoyable to me, because I have something to work with, and I'm taking something that's not very good and figuring out how to turn it into something, um, if not great, at least halfway decent, at least passable.
It's a good beginning.
Yeah.
What what are you working on projects these days?
Yes. Well, I just turned, we talked about how I just turned in a first draft
Hmm.
of book 3 for Time
Oh,
Castaways, but there's still quite a bit of work to be done. The revision stage is where things really come together for me. So I will be working on that and throughout the rest of this year pretty heavily. But I am working on a couple of other projects. I'm not quite ready to fully talk about them or say what they are, but suffice it to say, I have more that I have been working on, and one in particular, another middle grade novel that I just I am really loving it, and I would say, if there was one book where things felt like they were flowing, it would be this one,
oh, good. That's good to hear.
which
Good.
I feel like I deserve.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. I was saying, and then I said to you, "Oh, there's promise for me." It doesn't have to,
I
it
mean, I'm very in the early stages. I'm not too far along, so it could go badly anytime. But it has felt very freeing in some ways, that I'm not struggling so much for this one.
good. Well, hold on to it. Hold on to it. Don't let it go.
As long as possible.
Yeah, I realize. So, uh, as we're coming toward the end, I want to ask you, what advice do you have for aspiring young writers?
I think my advice is probably the same as most other writers, which is that you must read so much. Reading, that will be your greatest teacher. And the more you read, the better your writing will be. I really do believe that. And the more you write, the better your writing will be. Those two things will go hand in hand, the reading and the writing. Um, and it's okay if it doesn't feel like you're good at it. It's okay if it's hard. That doesn't mean it isn't, that you can't be good at it,
Mhm.
and that it's not worth struggling through it. I do not personally feel like I am a natural born writer. This is something that I have really a skill that I have worked very hard and struggled to develop. But it feels so worth it to me. To have words and to know how to use them feels like power. And I think everyone should have it,
Mm.
whether they're going to be a professional writer or not.
That's, well, I use the word inspiring. Well, that's what you were just saying there, I think could inspire a lot of people to just carry on with it if they felt the urge at all, to work with words. Um, I I come to say thank you um, for this, Liesl. I mean, it's been such a joy to talk with you today, and for the writer in me, I just said this, for the writer in me, it's been so inspirational, and it makes me realize how I love talking to other writers, and I love talking to you because you've come a long way with it all, and it's so inspiring to hear about your journey.
Thank you. This has been very delightful for me as well. I too love talking with other writers because there is this shared sort of experience where, no one except for those who have tried it can really understand.
That is so true. So, you live it, and then it's nice to. I mean, that's why I like interviewing you, because we're sharing some of that journey, and I think a lot of people could relate to that, and gather their energy and their creativity, even when they think they're not. I mean, how many people have said that to me? Kids will say, "Well, gee, I'm not very creative," and I think, "Oh, come on, give me a break here." That's it. Let's be true to one another. I think we all are. We just have to find that energy. I
Yeah,
want to,
they're
yeah,
creative. They're just not. It's more about you just haven't found the confidence in your creativity, but everyone's creative.
true, so true. Readers and writers, as I say goodbye to Liesl Shurtliff, I want to tell you that you can learn a lot about her at her website, www.lieslshurtliff.com, where, among other things, you'll find films and that make her books come alive. But there are other treats as well there that I think you'll probably want to take a look and also learn about her books. So, Liesl, thank you so much for this, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you. This has been so delightful.
Good. And talk soon. Thank you.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.